Hello and welcome, my fine friends, to another episode of Kevin 24/7. Top 5 reasons that Jeep Wranglers are better off-road than Humvees and Hummer H1s. Now, before you get all offended and upset, just know that I made this exact video, except it was called Top 5 Reasons, or I don't remember if it might have been Top 7. I forget the amount, but top whatever reasons that Humvees are better than Jeep Wranglers. All the Jeep Wrangler people were super cool about it. I don't think I had a single comment of anyone who was upset. They were all really nice, and I think they understood that it was just a video and it isn't going to affect their lives in any way, shape, or form. We will see if the Humvee crowd is so kind. Reason number 1. Jeeps have solid axles, front and rear. Now, this is sort of a hotly debated thing in the off-roading community. Wrangler people are really big on it. You know, Toyota people, not so much. People tend to think whatever their rig has will be the best. And if I spent good money on this vehicle, it must be better than everyone else's vehicle. Well, the Jeep Wrangler people do have a pretty good point, and having owned a Wrangler myself, or currently own one myself, and off-roading it a few times now, I understand actually what they're talking about. Solid axles are good for a few reasons. 1, it is by far the single easiest way to work on a critical component of an off-road vehicle. You know, when you have independent suspension, you are going to have a little bit more difficult time accessing the diff, accessing, your half shaft, your axles and stuff. It's a little bit more advanced, whereas the whole solid axle thing is old.
Are you going to be quiet for the video?
The old solid axle thing is more old school. It is just a differential, an axle on one side, an axle on another side, and that goes to your hubs and your brakes and all that stuff. So, personal experience, usually 9 times out of 10, it's going to be much easier to work on that kind of configuration than an independent suspension type setup. 2, it is the best by far for something called articulation. Now, while independent type suspension vehicles can be made to articulate very well, and that is the movement of the front or rear wheels over bumps while the body remains relatively level, so aka flex. It's much easier to make this happen well on a solid axle vehicle, and you can watch YouTube videos for yourself to kind of compare how well Jeep Wranglers and other solid axle vehicles seem to articulate. This helps with a multitude of things, balance, ride quality, rock crawling, all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to turn this into what is articulation and why is it important, but just know with a solid axle vehicle, you're going to have a much easier time articulating. Now, I should note, for those of you who don't already know, Humvees are independent suspension vehicles, and they have almost zero flex. Now, you could argue that they make up for that with their insane width, which is true to some degree, but it can be unnerving when you are hiking wheels multiple feet off the ground on uneven surfaces and that type of thing. I've experienced this firsthand, and it looks absolutely crazy. I never did flip over or anything like that, but it will definitely freak you out a bit. You could also argue that disconnecting the Humvee sway bar will help with this, and it will to a degree, but keep in mind that unless you can find some sort of quick disconnect sway bar end link solution, it's not necessarily something you want to try and do on the trail. I have disconnected a sway bar. It's not that hard on a Humvee. The hard part is getting the sway bar back in for when you're about to hit the highway. That is very frustrating and very difficult, or at least it was for me. Okay, reason number 2, and this one is a bit of a doozy. The aftermarket for a Jeep Wrangler is going to be far and away better than what you are going to get for any kind of Humvee, H1, whatever it might be. In fact, the aftermarket for a Jeep Wrangler is probably going to be better than any single off-road vehicle in all of America. It's a very common platform, it's very well liked, And because of that, there's a ton of competition in that aftermarket space that drives prices down and drives generally quality for your buck up. I am a big fan of Smittybilt. It's cheap and it's a better fit and finish than the more expensive custom made stuff I paid for on the Humvee. It also seems to be stronger in a lot of cases, better done, more quickly made, shipped to my house faster, and more widely available. I don't necessarily have a living situation where I can fabricate and weld and cut on metal and make all my own stuff. And I also don't really have the time to do that in my life. And honestly, I don't want to. I'd rather just pay a little bit of money, get something cheap and affordable that works great. And the Jeep Wrangler platform is absolutely perfect if that's what you're looking for. Reason number 3. And once again, this is another thing that I experienced firsthand from off-roading both a surplus Humvee and my 94 Jeep Wrangler YJ. The Jeep Wrangler is one of the most narrow off-road vehicles that you can buy from the factory. In fact, it's so narrow that it actually is comparable to the width of a lot of side-by-sides. And because of that, and the huge popularity of side-by-sides, that's a huge advantage. Being able to actually take your off-road or overlanding vehicle on side-by-side trails is extremely convenient, really cool, and a whole lot of fun. The Humvee, on the other hand, was so wide that it had almost zero chance of fitting on most side-by-side trails. And in fact, I actually struggled with a lot of normal off-roading / overlanding trails. Now, I'm not talking fire roads and stuff like that. You'll be absolutely fine. But basically, Jeep trails and Toyota Tacoma and 4Runner trails through the woods are a real challenge in a Humvee, and you have to be very careful. And part of what makes it so difficult is the width of the Humvee is not all just from its rear and front axle widths. It's actually more from the body. The body sticks out farther or just as far as the wheels and tires, depending on what combination you're running. And if you hit the body on a tree, which is very thin aluminum, you can cause a ton of damage. This can be mitigated with Nerf bars that stick out and prevent you from rubbing up against trees with that soft aluminum body, or let's say body armor, or anything you want to fab up by yourself. But sometimes it's easier to just have a more narrow vehicle and not really worry so much about this. A little side note here too is most two-door Jeep Wranglers are going to be a lot shorter than the Humvee, or I should say a little bit shorter than the Humvee. The Humvee is actually not an incredibly long vehicle, but it always helps to be smaller on the trail. You're never going to regret going with a smaller vehicle on any sort of tight trail, especially around where I live in the Midwest, where you're going to have heavy forestation, underbrush, and trees, and deep ruts in mud. Now, reason number 4, and this doesn't apply so much to the H1 as it does the Humvee. Jeep Wranglers, by their nature and design, and this is sort of an obvious point, are going to be much more streetable. Even the oldest Jeeps, the TJs, the YJs, stuff like I have, for the most part, are all going to be at least capable enough to go on the highway and do a small trip, as long as they've been well maintained and don't have ridiculous tire combinations and that sort of thing. Whereas some of your worst Humvees, like the A1 trucks, are limited to about 55 miles an hour, and at that they are very loud and not very fun to be in going down the freeway. To me, this is a really important thing. If you live in America, you pretty much have to get on the freeway to go anywhere, and if you want to go somewhere cool and you're not blessed with already living in an amazing off-roading environment like Arizona or California or Nevada or Wyoming or whatever it might be, a lot of times you have to drive multiple hours to where you want to go. Now, so much can be said for, well, just tough it out and man up and blah, 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 blah. But honestly, that only goes so far, and it's kind of stupid to buy something that is much less comfortable for road trips and much less fun to be in, maybe especially with your wife or your girlfriend or your children, when there are other options available if that's what you want to use the vehicle for. If it's just going to be a farm truck or you live off of a national forest with trails everywhere, that would be a different story. While this is a top 5 reason that Wranglers are better off-road than Humvees, some of you could argue that I'm getting off topic here and this one shouldn't count, but a huge part of off-roading is simply journeying to the place you have to go. you got to keep in mind that this is not really a hobby that you can usually do at home. It does require travel. And of course, you can buy a trailer and tow the vehicle with your truck. But to me, that takes a little bit of the feeling of adventure out of it and sort of the, I don't know, self-reliance type thing out of it, and changes it more into a toy rather than a vehicle that you can depend on and travel across the country or whatever it may be. And last but not least, this one is just simple physics. Argue it if you will, but it's kind of hard to beat the laws of nature. Humvees are much heavier than your average Jeep Wrangler. For instance, my Jeep YJ weighs anywhere from 2,800 to 3,200 pounds according to Google, and the average Humvee weighs anywhere from 5,200 to 5,900 pounds according to Google. If you're fortunate enough to be able to afford an H1 right now, or you already have owned one, you will know that those weigh closer to 6,800 pounds to 8,100 pounds according to Google. So that's getting pretty high up there on the scales for off-roading. You could argue that this could be mitigated with bigger tires and all sorts of things like that. But when you weigh a lot, you tend to sink a lot, and you tend to have trouble going up hills and rocks and all those kinds of things. Once again, it's just simple physics. Personally, I never had any massive issues with the weight of my Humvee. In fact, I didn't notice it that much, but there were a few instances where I seemed to be sinking a little bit more in mud holes and getting stuck in certain places that the lighter rigs did not. This is another reason that side-by-sides are so insanely capable, despite having smaller tires and not all that much ground clearance, is they just happen to be lighter, and they can go through stuff that other heavier, seemingly more capable platforms can't. Alright guys, that wraps up the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you don't get too upset by this, and we will see if the Humvee community and the H1 community is quite as civil as the Jeep community is. Thank you so much for watching as always. I will see you in the next one. I hope you can like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.